APUSH study video, and here we're going to talk about American communists living in America during the Cold War, as well as others who were accused of communism and the impact that these accusations would have on their lives and the many different anti-communist ventures at the time. And as well, we'll add on some good information to help you construct an essay when discussing the Cold War and social impacts, and maybe some complexity to tie it to different time periods and help you in your many APUSH endeavors. To give context to the anti-communist idea that was in America during the Cold War, you have to go back to the first Red Scare after the Russian Revolution, the proletarian revolution against the bourgeois, and this rise of communism, which was so anti-capitalist, and many Western countries were deathly afraid of this. America would call communism its mortal enemy, something that absolutely needed to be stomped out, no matter what the cost was, and they would do almost anything to get rid of this. And there was massive hysteria when fighting communism, and so this would lead to, right before the beginning of World War II, actually, the creation of the HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and that would be the perpetrator of many of these anti-communist acts and the influence in the social sphere. And so to start out, we're going to start with Harry S. Truman and Executive Order 9385. You probably don't need to remember the exact number, but you should remember that he had an executive order, and it was like, hey, by the way, we're going to make sure that everyone is screened for loyalty, right? Loyalty, aka, are you a commie? If yes, get out. And this included everyone, like all employees. Your postman was screened for loyalty to communism. Like, if your postman was a commie, he would be fired. Boom, right? And so many different people throughout the time in the government were accused of being spies, and some of this was true in the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg being convicted and then executed for the treason against the United States government. Klaus Fuchs, who was convicted of giving essential information from the Manhattan Project to the Soviet Union, and that was in 1950. And he was one of the lead scientists in the Manhattan Project. He was a German scientist, and he gave away information to the Soviets and was thus convicted of it. But everyone in the government on every level was looked into for these things. And a big one was with the rise of Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. See, he was a senator. He was kind of an interesting guy, right? And he went on in a famous speech, and he claimed that he knew at that moment of 205 people in the State Department who were running the nation, who were directly influencing America, who were all dirty commies. And immediately people were like, no, not the communists! And he was met with widespread criticism because a lot of these claims were completely baseless, but it does show the levels of hysteria that people are willing to go to on mass investigations and just this constant fear. And it coined the term of McCarthyism and conspiracy theories, and just the fact that it was allowed to happen and something like that shows the anti-communist fervor in the United States, and how people would be so ready to jump onto a situation, and anything could be scrutinized for communism. Even the Girl Scouts of America, right? A big example was just like looking at the Girl Scouts. They thought, oh, these guys are a bunch of commies. There's just this weird organization, like getting girls together and like sharing. Sharing sounds a lot like communism to me, and am I right? Communism, evil. And they would target anything, any sort of like idea of removing child labor, communism. Social movements, communism. Civil rights, communism. Like Martin Luther King, he was accused of being a communist. Just like, oh, you're fighting for civil rights. Sounds a lot like communism to me. And so this would just go everywhere. And then a really big example of this that you'll want to know about is Hollywood. Hollywood was targeted pretty heavily for communistic ideas, and the HUAC would force anyone with any sort of remotely left-leaning ideologies to testify against one another and renounce their political beliefs, or they'd be blacklisted. And that was a problem, because over 500 people working in Hollywood would become blacklisted and fired, and they wouldn't be hired ever again. And there was so much hatred against it, and people were prepared to, make sure that there was no media that could possibly be influenced by communism. The government wanted to have oversight over the media in that regard, so that they could remove the source and hopefully stop the spread of communism at the roots, which they viewed to be in Hollywood, because, California, it's weird. Cali's weird. I guess I understand. But they were definitely afraid of companies like UNESCO, and they just did not want these things to go through. And so this wouldn't just happen to Hollywood stars and directors and things like that. This scrutinization would also happen to the average citizen, and you could just be called communist, like the boy who cried commie, right? And all of a sudden you'd have law enforcement, they'd be checking up on you. It's like being on a terrorist watch list. That's a good piece of complexity that you can have. They put you on a list, oh, this guy could be a communist, similar to be oh, this guy could be a terrorist, and just watched out for. And even if you assigned yourself or affiliated with a political party, boom, you're donezo. And so another piece of complexity you could tie into this in American history was the Salem witch trials. You're called a witch, boom, executed, you're done. And you call a commie, boom, you're done. You call a rapist, boom, what you gonna do? Your career's over. So I hope that these ideas, that all these things that I've shared with you about commies in America at the time and what was happening to them could be enlightening to you and help you understand the specifics of what's happening to them and what this means for America, and how this idea of focusing on one group and directly hating it just because that's the big enemy of the weak, how that's been a recurring theme and the damage that can do to people's lives.